Going back to Ellen Brown here in just a moment. I wanted to run over some news headlines here. Congressman Poe speaks out as another Mexican helicopter invades U.S. And this is directly from the House of Representatives website. We have a flashback article. While government treats citizens as terrorists, Mexican military invades U.S. It is getting crazy right now. Immigrant crossings into Arizona on the rise as it's being announced in Spanish media that it's a mission to invade the United States and turn it into Mexico. American school kids aren't allowed to wear American flags. Agenda 21 alert, immigration theater, key article by Cassandra Anderson up at Infowars.com, breaking down how this is really about bringing in a North American Union. Continuing, anarchist group claims Ottawa bank firebombing. Very serious news on that front. Ottawa police investigating Royal Bank firebombing. Obama tells Mexican president, quote, "We are not defined by our borders." More treasonous, treacherous statements. BP and Coast Guard threatened to arrest journalists for covering oil-polluted shoreline in Louisiana. They did that to CBS News. Talk about arrogance. I already mentioned this, but woman's home confiscated over small water bill. Says Valentine lost her two-story brick home after the city sold her debt to investors for $362 through a continuous and Byzantine legal process called tax sale. A little-known type of foreclosure can enrich investors as growing numbers of property owners struggle to pay their bills. They're taking people's houses now, folks, for $300, okay? This country is just in flames. Meanwhile, dictator of failed state Calderon lectures Americans about freedom, calls for an end to the Second Amendment. And when he addressed Congress today, this is Twilight Zone, what's happening. But that's what happens with corruption. Once it gets to a certain point, it just drops off the edge of the earth. It just plunges into pure evil. Bangkok in flames after Army storms protest camp, AP. Bangkok under curfew after fresh anti-government violence. Greek strikers march on Parliament, protesting against losing their pension funds and 401ks. Oh, yeah, the government's... In fact, I have an article today where they're saying they're getting ready to take U.S. pension funds out of the Financial Times of London. Just incredible. And again, Obama's pushing for total amnesty, total legalization. The list just goes on and on and on of what is happening in this nation and how things are just deteriorating so quickly as the lawless criminals at every level of government just have open season on our republic. Here's another one out of the Denver Post. Douglas County votes to charge fees for school bus rides. Then you read what it's for, a $2 million program to make the kids have biometric ID cards they swipe and to GPS the school buses. So there's no money for the roads and the sidewalks, but there's money for these security companies to set up this prison grid. Here's another key article. Feds move to throw pot smokers in prison for impaired driving. Kurt Nimmo, Infowars.com. And it actually has a link to the National Drug Policy Strategy saying that they're going to have warrantless blood checkpoints. You've heard about those. And that they can find marijuana for up to 100 days, generally just 30. And of any cannabis that over 80% of the public reportedly smokes from time to time, I guess I'm part of the 20% that rarely smokes pot. I smoked it here and there. Don't really like it. But the issue is, it doesn't matter. They're just going to take your blood. You've got all these universities saying, got to give us DNA to get into the university. It's just so incredible that now they're going to take your blood at checkpoints or a cheek swab, and if they find THC, prison time. Prison time. So you smoked pot 100 days ago, doesn't matter, you're going to prison. Here's one, U.S. states pension funds becoming federal issue. It talks about state pension funds going bankrupt because they invested them in derivatives. Don't worry, the feds are going to take it over and only give you part of your money back. Folks, it's happened everywhere else, and it's happening here. People better get their priorities straight. Going back to Ellen Brown, the website's webofdebt.com. She's got a great book out on the subject of the Federal Reserve. But then another important article, cash-strapped states need to play the banking game. North Dakota shows how. Let's say you were on national news, Ellen, and you had 5 minutes to explain this, the basic bullet points, why it's important, what the alternative means going with the offshore bankers. I mean, if you had 5 minutes to just nail it and to crystallize why this is such a great avenue to financial liberty and sovereignty and freedom, what would you say?
Well, we still have a credit freeze on in all the states, and if you own your own bank, you can create credit, and states have a huge deposit and capital base with which they can leverage their money and create credit. So they could fund many things that we think we don't have the money for now, like infrastructure and education and low-cost housing. Plus, states are paying, well, in California, we're paying an average of 4.7% interest on our debt. If you're a bank, banks borrow from each other at the federal funds rate of 0 to 0.25%. That's what the Fed funds rate is right now. So it's an average of something like 0.2%. So if you're a bank, just for starters, the state could start funding its projects at a very low interest rate. And we've seen that, well, recently there was a lawsuit for these big banks that were colluding to set prices. So the states are paying much more than they should be paying for interest. Plus, we're subject to the rating agencies. You know, California, where I live, has a rating that's just hovering above Greece's. And we in California, the state has never defaulted on its debt. And there are the Wall Street banks, which would be bankrupt totally if we, the people, including largely California, hadn't bailed them out. They are paying this incredibly low interest rate, and we're paying a high rate because of our bad credit rating. So we could play their game. In other words, we can step into their shoes and get all the perks that a bank gets by being a bank.
Continue.
Well, I had started to explain about how banks create money. When a bank, first it creates money on its books, and then the check goes out of the bank, and then it has to clear it. And if the bank doesn't have the deposits to make it clear, then it just borrows that money back from the other banks, and it borrows at 0.2% interest. So essentially what it does is it creates money, the money goes out, and it borrows that very same money back. In other words, the pool has enough money out there because it just created it and put it out into the pool. It borrows that same money back at 0.2% interest, the Fed funds rate, or, 1 point something if they're taking longer CDs or whatever, but still it's a very low interest rate. And then they relend that to the states at, like California, 4.7%, or to individuals at 6% or something, or on credit cards up to 30% or whatever it is. So they're getting this huge spread. And if you own the bank, then that spread becomes taxpayer money. I mean, it goes back into the pool and feeds the pool. You had mentioned about the comprehensive annual financial reports. I was just asked to speak at a government finance officers convention about a month ago in Missouri. So I had a chance to talk to all these finance officers, and they said, indeed, that they had these huge rainy day pools that were anywhere from 20% to 75% of their budget that they had to stock away in this rainy day fund. And the reason was that unlike banks, which have this infinite credit line and can borrow anytime they want, states, they can't borrow. They have to go to the voters and do a bond issue. It's a big, laborious process, and it's never certain whether it's even going to happen. They don't know if they're going to be able to auction off their bonds. So it's actually happened in Missouri there, where a city would just come to a standstill. Like there would be no money for anything, and the city would stop because they didn't plan their budgets correctly. So just to make sure, they stock away all this money in rainy day funds. Well, you can't, like in California, I know the treasurer manages $70 billion in a treasurer's pool of this sort of rainy day fund. Whereas, so the state's like $26 billion in debt, and we have $70 billion sitting in this investment pool. But you're not allowed to touch it because it's all earmarked for different things. Like Governor Schwarzenegger tried to get some of the highway fund money, and the court in San Diego said, no, that's earmarked for highways. You have to use it for highways.
To interrupt, it's basically all rigged to the big mega banks, and now they've taken over society, and NAFTA and GATT has destroyed our industrial base.